Hey there, welcome to School of Emo, the podcast where we dive into the world of emo, pop punk, and everything in between. If you've ever found yourself in your car screaming the lyrics to Taking Back Sunday, wearing way too much eyeliner in the early 2000s, adding a buckle or a chain to every outfit you've put on, you are in the right place. I'm Erin Judge, and each week I will be your fellow student, guiding you through the music, the culture, and the history that shaped an entire generation of angsty teens. I am not the teacher of this school. I am a fellow student, here to learn alongside you and from you. Together, we will cover a lot of information that doesn't really matter, but will remind us of the days of stalking MySpace channels and getting lost in chat rooms. So connect your dial-up, turn on your webcam, and let's go to School of Emo. Welcome back to School of Emo. Today we are going to the Midwest, which we have not been in very much throughout our seasons and our episodes. And we're going to talk about a band that we can maybe say is one of the kind of founding bands, founding fathers of emo, but one that is kind of in a way like the left field, just because they didn't necessarily stick around very long, haven't put out that much music, but their influence reached a lot further than I'm sure they would have ever imagined. Like maybe right place, right time, like just coming into the space with something different. And somehow created a legacy that they could still be a part of within this world that is unmatched. And it's so interesting, especially as a semi-outsider, someone who's coming into this space that liked the music, enjoyed the third wave, but wasn't heavily involved in an underground scene or the music of the 90s as closely. And that is American football. And what's so interesting is that this band came up for me whenever I was doing the Origins of Emo episode right around a year ago. So make sure you go check out that episode. I believe it was great. But this band came up in some of the early kind of storytelling of how emo became what it is now and what led to the virality and the expansion of emo and just all the bands that would kind of explode in the early 2000s. Like American football comes up, but they had not been a band that I'd ever heard of. I'd never seen any of them, like their music didn't pop up on anything. I wasn't really hearing about them even from bands that I was listening to, like podcasts and interviews of, talking about their early influences. So I was kind of confused about who this band actually was. And then out of nowhere, it seems like they just popped up on my feed doing a semi-collaboration with Hayley Williams and Vans, and over the last year they just kind of popped up again, and it sparked my interest into like who are these guys, like what is this band, and why are so many fans like really stuck on them being kind of a foundation for emo and like part of the influences of the early 2000s when they're not someone that we've heard as much of. So let's dive into their history and see where they fit in. So we're going all the way back to 1997 in Urbana, Illinois, and looking at three college kids who shared a love of melody, math rock complexity, and emotional honesty. And if you're not familiar with what math rock is, because I actually was not, and a lot of these bands that we've dove into like talk about math rock, this is a style of alternative and indie rock music that originated and kind of, I guess, came out of the late 1980s. So forming a foundation for what was going to happen in the 90s. And it was showcased by complex atypical rhythmic structures. So odd time signatures, syncopation, stop-start dynamics, very instrumental, emphasizing more technical proficiency with the kind of intricate guitar tapping and angular riffs. So it's influenced by progressive rock and jazz fusion, and not something that is heavily like hardcore. So it's part of some of this kind of flavor, I guess, of emo and alternative that is a little different than what we're going to see out of like the post-hardcore scene that we were seeing maybe in the East Coast, or, even more of the punk scene in the West Coast. So a little bit different. So that was something that kind of formed a bit of their foundation of their sound. And you would see that in their influences on other bands that were to follow in the 2000s, of just kind of how they approached this world, right? And emo spread in the different varying parts of the country on its own and kind of created these different flavors, which we've talked about, which led to that explosion where emo became such a huge umbrella, because what was happening in DC with Rites of Spring was very different than what was happening in Jersey with bands like Thursday. And then what was happening again in that kind of punk, pop punk space with like Green Day and bands like that on the West Coast, that was all a little different. And so what was coming out of these different parts of the country would then influence like all the different facets of what we know of emo as today. And American football was part of that. So the original lineup was Mike Kinsella on vocals and guitar, Steve Holmes on guitar, and Steve Lamos on drums, later also trumpet. The inspiration for the name, because it is interesting, right? It's kind of odd, especially for kind of a post-hardcore, emo-core, whatever you want to call it, band. So the drummer, Steve Lamos' girlfriend, actually found a flyer for a Chicago Bears versus Pittsburgh Steelers preseason game in Dublin, Ireland, which is kind of random. And it read, "Come see American football," featuring the most overpaid athletes in the whole world. And so the band members thought that that tagline was funny and decided to adopt American football as their name for their project. And this wasn't necessarily meant to be a huge band. Like, they weren't setting out to be like on tour all the time or the next big band. Like, it truly was college kids wanting to make music together and writing music between classes and putting something out. So they released a short EP in 1998 that hinted at the unique sound that they were shaping and just having fun with, which was more introspective and intricate, very emo, but still a little bit rough, which kind of gave it a bit of that emo core style. And then in 1999, very quickly after that EP, nothing happened. Not at first. So before we get into what followed and how the music found its way to fans without a big push of tours and a record label, what made the music so distinctive? Like, what made it special and unique that then could catch on in the underground scene? So the guitars were the big standout. They talk about them as like twinkly, like shimmering and twinkling guitars, weaving in and out of each other, sometimes delicate, sometimes more abrupt, always melodic, that kind of math rock style. And then that combined with the introspective lyrics about youth, change, loss, it all struck a chord with listeners who felt like they were hearing their own feelings put into music, which is emo at its core. Then there was kind of the vibe of the whole thing. So nothing over the top, nothing extreme, no huge choruses, really atmospheric. One writer even pointed out how the instruments tell a story without words, from the wistful highs to the hesitant lulls. And then some fans on Reddit wrapped it up like this: American football is emo jazz. It's like emotion and sound waves. Another, their music hits me harder than heavier bands. And that's what made it so special and connect so much with this kind of emo evolution, revolution, whatever we want to call what was happening in the late 90s into the early 2000s. It felt honest, it felt real, and the lyrics were there, but the music itself led to kind of the ups and downs and exploration of all of the feelings involved. Not just the heavy feelings and the anger and the angst and that. It led to the introspective type of feeling as well, the sadness. Like, it showcased, the music itself showcased a lot of those emotions. So September 1999, they finally released their self-titled debut album, which is often referred to as LP1. So a couple of years later. This was recorded in only a week and was never meant to be more than a creative outlet, just like their first EP. No streaming, no fist bumping. It was quiet, intricate, emotionally affecting, had jazzy drums, interlocking guitar lines, wistful vocals, and even trumpet on songs like The Summer Ends. This gave us songs like Never Meant, Stay Home, Honestly. They didn't explode on the charts. There were no plaques, no platinum numbers or successes. And at the time, the album really didn't go anywhere. It barely made a ripple in the scene. But that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. So before the album was even released, the band members decided to break up as they graduated and pursue regular lives and jobs. So again, wasn't meant to be anything more than just a project. They did play a few small local shows and then they faded away, assuming the band was a footnote in their lives. They did it. They have the music. That's it. So there was never any touring or album promotion for the release of this album. They had already been done before they even released it. But over the next 15 years, the album began to grow in reputation through file sharing sites like LimeWire, independent music blogs, and word of mouth, especially among college-aged emo fans that connected heavily to the lyrics and the style that was there. So right place, right time, right? Their music was out there. They weren't doing anything for it, but because word of mouth was so strong and there were new ways of sharing music that didn't rely so heavily on the presence within a local scene, their music began to spread. So around 2014, the band realized via their label, Polyvinyl, that they had an active, passionate fan base that they had never even engaged with. So they decided to do a reunion, which was coincided with the deluxe 15th anniversary reissue of LP1. And they reunited for a few shows, shocked to find that they were selling out massive venues. Insane. Like unheard of. This is not something that we would really see today. So even though the record wasn't a huge hit necessarily, it was being discovered and it was being shared. And according to fans on Reddit, some experiences from that period of time. One user said, American football was kind of a side note when I first heard them, then boom, they exploded years later. Another said, it really did take almost a decade before people realized how special it was. So a band that didn't even last long enough to tour and make a way through their local scene suddenly became a cornerstone of emo culture. So then in 2014, they reunited for the series of shows. They released that deluxe issue of LP1. And then in 2016, they released LP2, another self-titled album, 17 years after the first. And in 2019, they released a third self-titled record, which captured both older fans and new listeners with their kind of emotional lyricism and their style. In this album, they did a lot of collaborations, and they actually collaborated with the one and only Hayley Williams of Paramore on the song Uncomfortably Numb, which was released in January 2019 as part of LP3, the third album. And it's a melodic emo dream pop duet between Hayley and Mike, the frontman of American football, exploring the themes of adulthood, memory, and emotional detachment. Their sound matured through this album and across the different records between LP1 to LP2 to LP3, still rooted in the melancholic, interlocking riffs of their early days, but shaped by their lives that were lived, aging, reflecting, and grappling with memories and change, like a lot of the bands have as they've gotten older. Like emo, the vulnerability and the introspection involved in the lyrics matures with you, and they were able to do that through music, which is so fascinating. It makes sense, and like it's not necessarily special in and of itself compared to other bands of this time and in this genre, but it is special when you think about how many, like 15 years, 17 years between the albums, right? To take that much time completely off and then come back and be able to still do that. Like I'm sure they were writing and playing music and maybe still involved in creating on their own, maybe even together during that time. But to be able to come back and still be in it and create something that fans that found you when you weren't even engaging with them anymore, like they found a project you left behind, like that's pretty special and unique. And their influence is a testament to that. It's so immense that indie and emo artists today cite them as a touchstone, and covers of LP1 by artists like Iron and Wine, Ethel Cain underscore how deep their reach has become beyond emo into a lot of different spaces of music. It's also funny, as I mentioned at the very beginning, they also did a collaboration with Vans in 2025. Like the Vans, right? Not a surprise they would do something with an emo band because the scene, Vans, is part of that. I don't see that many collaborations with bands that are huge and still at the forefront of the scene with Vans. But out of nowhere in 2025, we get a Vans collaboration with American football featuring the cover art from LP1, the 1999 album, celebrating 25 years. With the band really kind of coming in and out, very relaxed into the scene. Insane, right? It doesn't make sense, but just shows how much of an influence they had. Maybe it is their relationships. I have no idea. Haley was even part of that. Like, right? It's so interesting to see. And then in 2026, they just announced a tour across the U.S. We're going. I'm excited. Their music is different. It's not something I'm drawn more, I think, to like the heaviness, more of a kind of post-hardcore sound than the sort of jazzy style, math rock, I guess. But I'm just so curious to be a part of it. And even seeing a band like Thursday recently and just the appreciation of bands that shaped a lot of the music I love now and get to enjoy now because of their early works. I'm excited to be part of that. Also, I mean, selfishly hoping that Hayley Williams is somehow there because it is the Nashville show. She's touring too, so who knows? But it's interesting, right? They're back on tour. Their last album, what would I say, 2019 for LP3? So, new album coming. What's happening? Maybe the tour just went on sale, so it hasn't started yet. So maybe there's more to come this year. So when we look back at their legacy, it's not just critical. Like, it's such an emotional part of emo culture. Fans show up at shows in flannel and jeans talking about how the music feels like memory itself. Even those who didn't grow up with the band that are discovering them now, even via TikTok, are enjoying what they're putting out and like part of it and part of this community that really wasn't nurtured. It kind of nurtured itself. Going back to Reddit, fans debate the band's place in emo history. One saying they weren't a big band originally, but now they're legendary. Their sound influenced so many Midwest and indie rock bands. And then there's the emo pilgrimage, fans photographing the iconic American football house from the LP1, a symbol of emo nostalgia that bands themselves have helped preserve. So this is a band whose emotional resonance outlived their original run and became timeless just because of the music alone. Now, looking at their virality on TikTok, there is one song that took off in recent years from that 1999 album, LP1, called Never Meant. So we're actually going to read those lyrics. Let's just forget everything said and everything we did. Best friends and better halves. Goodbyes. And the autumn night when we realized we were falling out of love. There were some things that were said that weren't meant. There were some things that were said that weren't meant. There's some things that were said, but we never did. Not to be overly dramatic, I just think it's best because you can't miss what you forget. So let's just pretend everything and anything between you and me was never meant. Was never meant. And that's it for American football. Pretty short story overall, but fascinating. And I wish maybe you were part of this. Maybe you were one of the people that found their music during that period of time where it was just being shared, but unrealized fully. I would love to hear your story and your experience with that. If you're able to share through, you can leave a review and share there, give 5 stars, please. Or you can go to YouTube where you can leave comments. That's a helpful way to interact with other people. But if you weren't, then your homework is simple. I want you to go listen to LP1, maybe read the lyrics as you do, kind of really fully experience the music as if you found it in a drawer left behind by an emo elder. And then listen to LP2 and LP3 and listen for the maturity in the lyrics and how the sound evolves over time, and just put yourself in the shoes of those early emo generations of the 90s finding this music and experiencing it in real time, and then what it became. And if you love it, maybe get a ticket to the upcoming tour if you're able to, because I think it can be really interesting, right? These, even though they're not My Chemical Romance, right? They're not that huge, but they are impactful, and that often brings along a lot of surprises. And what I'm finding is just the better understanding of this world that we're all part of in some way, like just being able to be part of it again, like in its history, which is so special and something we're not going to have forever. There will never be another time like the second to third wave of emo. And I think being able to keep going back and experiencing that in the smallest ways that we can is so important. So that's your homework from today's class. And then next week, we will be continuing on with our exploration. We will actually be covering a recap of the Story of the Year album release show in St. Louis, which I, as me recording this today, am heading out for in just a couple of days. The album is released in 2 days from now. So we'll talk about the album, but also talk about the show. So it'll be a little delayed at time of release for you. But then we'll start going through some other bands and some of the third wave, but also trying to pull some of these bands that maybe are less known but have had an impact. So I hope to see you in our next class.